First of all, I would like to apologize in the name of Ildefonso Hernandez. He had a health issue and he couldn't come with us, which is a pity.
The mics need to go away from you.
Yeah. And you hear me well now? Yeah. So, David, so we are just the four of us. Something that I wanted, before I introduce you to my colleagues in the table, I wanted to say we are going to discuss a little bit about the Roundup ready in agriculture in Argentina, but also we wanted to create a 2 hours, hour and a half now, panel discussion about the goals of the conference and the reasons why we are here, really. So this is also a time for our speakers to talk a little bit about their experience. As we said at the beginning, it's a multicultural and multidisciplinary Congress. So we want to hear also from people that are not scientists. So let me introduce you briefly to my colleagues. To my right is Simon Birkett. He was responsible for the campaign Clean Air London 2006. In 2009, Simon sued the previous British government for one of what he called the major scandals in health. Because of the government not showing really the number of deaths related to air pollution in London. He's going to explain to us a little bit more about that. To my left, I have Henry Dahl. He's an attorney that can work in New York, Washington, Buenos Aires, and Madrid. He has a lot of experience international in litigation, and he has led a very interesting cause of a case of Mexico in Mexico that he's going to explain briefly as well. And David Quist, who is a senior scientist of GenØk, the Center of Biosafety in Norway, although he's American. So we are going to have three very interesting international points of view. And I'm going to maybe leave the word to my colleague Simon, who did you manage to have who's going to, he has just just one slide, but he's going to help his presentation. He's very brief, very efficient, and then, as I said, after the 10 minutes presentation, 15 minutes of each of us, we are going to be talking about the goals of the Congress as well.
Okay, that's fine. PDF's fine. Just to do full screen.
I'm not sure I know how to do that, but
you used to be American. That's fine anyway. It's either is fine. Yeah.
you can watch it.
Okay, thank you.
Just one.
I only have one slide, but I will talk for a few minutes, and I hope that's about the right distance from the microphone. London has problems with its political leaders, I guess, in the same way that there are in other countries. The recently re-elected Mayor of London I was rude about the previous government, but the current mayor I accused of public health fraud on an industrial scale for running a pollution suppressor truck in front of the air quality monitoring stations most relied on to issue smog alerts and report legal breaches. And that policy of his was condemned by the three other mayoral candidates in the election a couple of weeks ago. So we all have problems with our political governance, I think. The presentations we've seen earlier this afternoon are excellent, but what I'd like to do is draw out some first principles, because this is a very special conference, and we're going to cover chemicals, pesticides, nanoparticles, and electromagnetic radiation. So I'd like to just draw out some really general principles. And this slide is taken from a scientific paper by Professor Nino Kunzli, published in 2001, and he's an epidemiologist who I respect greatly. The outer circle is the, and this could be, it's the total number of deaths in a place and a time. So it might be the number of deaths in London in 2008 or in a country in a year. The smaller circles are those attributed to, at the top left, the long-term health effects, the number of attributable deaths, and the circle on the right is the number due to short-term exposure to, in this case, air pollution. Now, those circles overlap, and I suspect it's the same for the other things that we will talk about over the next couple of days. And even in something like this, air pollution, which has been studied for decades, we still don't know whether the health impacts overlap 0% or 100%. This is really just for one type of pollution, for example. So that's, say, for particulate matter, the dangerous particles, but you could draw up the same sort of circles within the overall circle for sulfur dioxide, ozone, and others. So you've got different pollutants, short and long-term effects, and they can all overlap 0% or 100%, and we really don't know. The number of attributable which is used is a pure statistical measure. It's a sort of theoretical measure, and so when they refer to attributable deaths, it eliminates, in this case, 40 other possible causes of death. So it's a way of comparing the health effects of, say, nanoparticles and pesticides and air pollution and so on, but it's typically used in public health terms for comparing smoking, alcoholism, obesity, death, and so on. What I'd like to do here is just highlight the fact that for air pollution, in 1952 we had the Great Smog of London, and we had 4,000 deaths due to short-term exposure to air pollution, which is really that bottom right, the lower right circle, the short-term circle. We knew nothing then about the health impacts of long-term exposure to, in this case, air pollution, but it could be any of the other things that we will talk about. And it was only, and what you could do, it was very easy to do. Air pollution went up. 2 days later, there were 4,000 extra coffins, to be buried. It was only, though, in 1995-2000, in the States, through studies looking at cohorts of people, an age group over many years, that they were able to identify that the health impacts of long-term exposure are about 5 to 10 times greater, and the numbers we think now are even greater than that, than the short-term effects. So there were 4,000 deaths in London. I accused the British government, the previous government, of one of the biggest public health failings or cover-ups in modern history for never publishing an estimate for long-term deaths attributable to long-term exposure to air pollution. I produced some envelopes with some help from all sorts of people who were keen to help me, and estimated, put out numbers of 3,500 in London and 35,000 nationally. And in fact, those numbers were confirmed by subsequently by two parliamentary committees. And when the Mayor of London actually did publish a report, his number was actually 4,300. The actual number was quite a lot higher than my own estimate. In context, only smoking, say, causes 90,000 deaths in a country like the UK. Air pollution, long-term exposure to air pollution, short-term exposure, 30 to 50,000 deaths. Alcoholism, 20. Obesity, 10,000. Road traffic accidents, about 2,000. So, the issues that we're going to debate in the conference are incredibly important, but we do need to think about the different pollutants, and we need to think about short and long-term effects, and I think it's very important to remember those principles. This is only talking about mortality. We need to worry about morbidity. Up to 30% of all new cases of asthma in children. maybe due to, there's now a causal link from the States, living or going to school within 150 metres of the busiest roads. So in a sense, we knew nothing about these effects 60 years ago. We did something about them then. 4,000 deaths in London was enough to turn the country upside down and bring in the Clean Air Act. But now 4,000 deaths, we have the mayor spraying the streets with glue. So this is an issue really right around the world where we do need to tackle these problems. And I think I would suggest, in terms of the action points that we might lead to, we need good science. We definitely need to communicate it clearly and robustly. It's no good going out and saying, well, it's a 95% confidence interval and we're not sure about this, that or the other, when for the other public health risks, they're ignoring all of those things. We have to speak in the same language and improve the overall language for the use of communication of these risks. We need science, communication, policy, and we need robust enforcement. The British government has said that they are seeking to reduce the risk of infraction, legal action from the European Commission on nitrogen dioxide laws, which have been in legislation since 1999. I mean, these sorts of things are quite astonishing, and they go to great lengths not to raise the subject and make it a public issue. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Let me, if you want to talk a little bit about your work and also give a bit of a better perspective of what you have been doing professionally, and then we can all also David and then we can all talk.
Sure. I think there is some symmetry here because our friend Simon, he lives in England and he has sued the English government. I live in the United States and I have sued the American government. So that's a strange coincidence. Perhaps I'm the only non-scientist in the room, and I apologize. Oh, sorry. I'm an attorney, I do international law, and what I really do is I sue multinational corporations, particularly when they do something wrong in Latin America. And what I have discovered, or at least in my experience, all these topics that we're talking about today and tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, they have, of course, a legal dimension. And the legal dimension is talking about the victims, about how to redress their lives. And what I usually do is I work with big American law firms who are already doing this lawsuit, whichever it may be, and I do the international legal part and the part of comparative law. At the beginning, what we used to do was we detected something that a multinational corporation had done wrong in Peru, to say one particular country, and we would sue these corporations in the United States. At one point, that became a bit difficult because of a legal theory called forum non-convenience, by which the American court, although they recognized that they had jurisdiction, they said, well, but because this happened in another country, it's easier for the case if we send you to that particular country. Now, of course, that usually tended to be the kiss of death. It would be very difficult to litigate a big international case in the courts of Peru, particularly in a provincial court far away from the capital city. And when we were faced with this type of problem, we thought that what could the solution for this be? And apparently the way to solve this problem, and the problem again would be how to bring justice to victims in our case, in Latin America, for something very wrong that a powerful multinational corporation had done. It seems, and that's what we're trying to do now, that the answer to this problem is, if we can't litigate the case in the United States because the courts close the doors to our case, the thing to do is to take the case to that particular country where the events happened. But before you do that, you change the law. And so what I'm working at is changing the laws in Latin American countries, and I drafted this, I call it the International Litigation Act, and it has like 4 or 5 key points. And if you have the goodwill of the local legislators, you can do it. And in fact, we did it in a few countries in Latin America, and we're trying to expand it. And for instance, one key point that everybody would realize is a particular rule that says something like, if there are 2 legal systems applicable to the case, for instance, again, something wrong happened in Peru because an American chemical company did something bad to the Peruvian people, then there are 2 competing legal systems. Both would be applicable, the Peruvian legal system and the American legal system. And for damages, we devised a rule saying that the court has to apply the level of damages, choosing from the 2 competing legal systems the one that is more favorable to the victim. Now, that would mean that if an American corporation harms Peruvian people, and we can prove that they're to blame for that, then the American corporation has to pay the Peruvians exactly the same as if the American corporation had harmed Americans in the United States. And that's one of the points that we have. Another point is that in this International Litigation Act, there is an article or a section that says that you can use evidence that has been presented in a foreign lawsuit. Because usually big international lawsuits happen first in the United States. And we have very powerful means to obtain evidence. We call it discovery. And then we end up with a pile of highly incriminating documents. But those documents that are very incriminating are very hard to introduce in foreign litigation. But in this particular type of law, the International Litigation Act, we just have one article that says, as long as the documents have been used in foreign litigation, they can be used in the courts of Peru, for instance. And to make it easy, we say, and you only have to translate the relevant parts that you want to rely on. So if we have 200 documents and we are interested in one paragraph here, another paragraph there, that's all we have to do. We have to translate, we only translate the paragraphs in question. And so it's, there is no magic formula, really. The most important thing of all this is to be able to befriend the local legislators. And what amazes me is, on the one hand, how little they know about this, but once they realize, it takes like a full day sitting down and having coffee and talking to them, but once they realize, they say, oh yes, we're going to help you with this. And they fight very hard, and results can be obtained. And I think that's a good way to improve things. And the first generation is what I just said, the International Litigation Act. But we have second generation laws which is to introduce class actions to these countries. Because class actions are a good weapon for people to obtain justice when they have been when there are great numbers of victims. A class action is a very good vehicle to obtain redress for those victims. And I think that's all I have to say now.
That's a very good
Yes.
point. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is that the right distance? It's okay? Yeah. I guess I'll introduce myself a little bit since I guess you have it in your program. My name is David Quist. I'm at the Center for Biosafety in Tromsø, Norway. So I'm actually Norwegian now.
Are you?
Yeah,
Sorry.
as of last year. So just a clarification on that. A little bit about my background. You know, my PhD I got in Berkeley 2004 in microbial ecology and evolution. So I have a background in molecular biology, microbiology, and evolution. I started out working with farmers in rural Mexico. And really, that's where my perspective kind of comes from in terms of thinking about technology development and sustainable development is what are the needs of the local communities and how we're proceeding with technologies allowing us to meet those needs or not meet those needs. Really what I want to do, I didn't really prepare any comments. I just wanted to give a few reflections on things that I heard this morning and try and steer it towards a direction that the panel is taking and thinking about future actions and so forth. The first is about science and uncertainty, because a lot of what we've heard here in this debate is that, you know, there could be effects, there are indications of effects, some debating whether these are biologically relevant or will take place in the real world. But what I think we can agree on is that there is a degree of scientific uncertainty that justifies taking precautionary action and thinking about what we need to do to be able to resolve some of these uncertainties. And of course, improving the science is a part of that. And that leads into risk and risk assessment, because that's really what I'm doing. You know, I moved from working with farmers on quite quickly to, you know, being involved in negotiations in the Cartagena Protocol. So I represent the Norwegian government in some scientific advisory groups looking at risk assessment. I've also advised the African group on liability and redress in the Nagoya Protocol, Nagoya negotiations and so forth. So I have a little bit of experience about thinking about the risk assessment aspects. A few reflections. One is about this notion of a package. So some wish to, when thinking in the context about Roundup Ready soy and the use of glyphosate, is that some would like to distinguish these as separate things, that they involve different processes. But if we're thinking about how the regulation is formulated, at least under Cartagena, you have to think about intended use. So the intended use of a Roundup Ready soy would be to use it in conjunction with a Roundup Ready chemical or glyphosate. So you can't really distinguish or separate out the intended use from other management practices that are also involved with it. So that's to point out that this is actually embedded in some of the guidance documents that we're making under the Cartagena Protocol. So many of you may or may not know the Cartagena Protocol. I'll assume that you do. It's a protocol on biosafety that provides some international guidance and some legal obligation in relation to transboundary movement of GMOs, or we say LMOs in the Cartagena circles. And we've developed some guidelines that have said that risk can also take into account agricultural management practices, like herbicide applications, in terms of evaluating an LMO. So there is some precedence to say that you don't have to necessarily just say, okay, glyphosate is one thing, it involves one level of risk assessment, and then the GMOs separately. Mm-hmm. We're looking at a more integrative concept in doing this, and so there is some guidance around that that's going, also with monitoring as well. So just that. That's probably going to be finalized for the COP MOP that's coming up in Hyderabad, India, later this year. The other thing I wanted to mention, because the other part of my job is about evaluating the science behind a lot of these risk assessments. So I do some advisory work for the Norwegian government to look at the nuts and bolts, the science behind these applications. And really, when you take a look at a lot of these things, and as a scientist, I'm really disappointed at the quality of science that actually really goes in there, the number of samples that are used. Most of these studies would not pass peer review. So it gets back to, there's not a lot of awareness of this, there's not a lot of openness about these because a lot of these applications and the information is confidential. But when we're able to look at them more critically, and CREGen and some of these groups that have actually analyzed the raw data have looked closely at this and seeing that the actual conclusions that are being drawn are not supported by the data. And we see this quite often when we're actually evaluating these applications. So there's a lot to be done with the science, I think, and by making the system more transparent, and I think that's one of the actions future is to make the system more transparent so there can be more critical evaluation of the science. I mean, that's how science works, right? We allow the methods, we allow all the information to be made public. Other independent researchers want to verify that result, reproduce the study. That's how good science works. And we don't have that in terms of the risk science going on today. I don't want to go too long because I want to make this more interactive, of course. But I think the third pillar that I'd like to discuss is about the public conversation and the public engagement that needs to be brought into the equation here. And I'll bring it back into what we're discussing about agriculture, about soy production, about this soy model, the soy economy, as it's been called in Latin America, in Argentina particularly. And it's something that Walter Pengo said at a conference I was at a couple of years ago. And it's a very basic question that we tend to kind of forget. You know, we're talking about GMOs. There's kind of an implicit endorsement by just having these kinds of conversations. Rarely do we step back and just ask a very simple question. Why is it that we do agriculture in this way? Who tends to benefit from doing agriculture in this way? Who bears the costs? How are these benefits distributed? How does these choices impact other choices that could be made? And I think that's the kind of conversation that we need to be having on a more public level as we move forward and say, are these the kinds of technologies that are going to be producing the kinds of benefits that we want, particularly for those, you know, things like the Millennium Development Goals and so forth that we think that we want our innovations and technologies. I'll be speaking about this more in a few days. But I think that we have to step back and have that conversation first to say, why are we pursuing this technology, or why are we pursuing this intervention in this way, regardless if we're talking about energy or agriculture or what have you, health. And is this the way forward for society? Is this the way that society wants to go? And what are the benefits? What are the costs? And how certain can we be of those? So I'll leave it at that. And then the last thing is how to create the political will. Once you've had that conversation, how do you create the political will that will lead to action? Okay, I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Good. Thank you, David. I think that's a good point, and I think it's something that listening to you three and before with the speakers this morning, I think we should make a reflection because we have a lot of issues along the line. But I suppose the first question that we should address here is why do we do what we do? Why do we need these technologies? The first thing I think we should be talking about. And actually another point that also Simon talked about is how do we communicate us as a circle of professionals involved in health, public health and environment. Are people really aware of these things? So I don't think really the public knows much about this. That's one thing that we should address in these 3 days, how to communicate these issues to the general public. And secondly, how can we improve really the systems of control of these technologies so the products that go into the industry and the market, they are safer for us and for the environment. I mean, surely we have to address an action plan and in which the main, the client, so to speak, is the general public. Another level is politicians, I think, and also policymakers, because as Henry was pointing out before, I think once the policymakers know what's going on and the risks of population involved, they are truly interested, and that's why, in fact, I mean, a year ago in the last answer meeting in France, I was actually very surprised because I'm not a scientist either, so you're not the only one. Simon is not a scientist either. So I was really surprised, and along last year I've been to many scientific congresses, and I think if any person or the majority of the general public would understand the results of all these fantastic studies, they would actually change their habits so much. And that is one of the key things that we need to talk about today, because this comes, we have to talk also about economics and sociology. The reason why we create nanotechnologies or GMOs or pesticides is probably and simply because they want to make money, and because the industry wants to make money and more money and more money. I think possibly it's also because there is a demand and because things want to be better and so on. But surely it's been proved, and I think I can put my hand on the fire, as we say in Spanish, that majority, the driving motor for all the industries is to make money, not to improve quality of life or anything. So once we know that, but I mean, I'm sure there is an intention to create better products and better technologies and make life easier. But if on one hand we are making life easier, but on the other hand we are killing thousands of people, I think there has to be a group of professionals thinking about what is happening really and what are the alternatives. So anyway, I don't want to also go very long on my own, but I think we should really address these as and not do what I've seen in all these congresses and many congresses, that we arrive to certain conclusions, we are happy because we all agree in the same conclusions, and then we all go home and we don't do anything. So I think we should really take notes and then try to think together, even if we are only a few of us, work together towards a plan in which we can kind of improve the current circumstances that we are living in today, because as you may know, and most of us are aware of the economical crisis and the sociological crisis and the environmental crisis are linked. So I think we should really maybe try to start from these broaden questions and try to address how we are going to arrive to the public and how we are going to arrive to politicians and to policymakers to really make a change, because there's thousands and thousands of scientific papers done, and I think there is more than enough results, although of course in these 3 days, now 2 days, we are going to see fantastic results and new information. But I think there is enough evidence, scientific evidence and scientific proof to make things better. So now we have to work towards how we are going to improve the current system so we can protect better society and the environment.
To address a question that has not been addressed yet, and that is, you've reported about the effects you observe of glyphosate exposure and Roundup exposure and all of that, but how does it come that in Argentina, you've also reported what clinical symptoms you see in the population now, how is the exposure side, how come does the exposure of the people in Argentina come about to such levels of glyphosate and Roundup that they start seeing these problems, so that these problems manifest? I mean, I know the answer, but I want you to address why that is. Because, reporting about effects you do in experiments in a lab, connecting them to some clinical symptoms. I mean, where's the link, the causal chain of events that leads to this? How come that such large populations are being exposed? How is it done? And once you've told us that, my questions would go to the lawyers. I find this a human rights violation, and I wonder what's the legal content or what's the legal possibilities in that.
Okay. Well, it's quite straightforward. I mean, there is most of the herbicides, insecticides, and agrochemicals are spread by planes, and there is no respect for communities and village, cities, small cities. Actually, that is probably one of the causes. I mean, 70% is calculated is the toxicity is done by inhalation. Okay, probably 30% by direct contact. I mean, manipulation of a chemical, and a few percentage probably because there are some ingest or something like that. That came to the other point, what the people do, because this is a magic situation. Myself, I am very much involved in social movements that are worried about that, not only with agriculture, also by mining and water, etc., etc. Then what the population, small villages, start to do is start to ask to the justice to do some preventions. And there are a few sentences that ban the use, ban for make a belt of security around the small village. But what happened is at least 3 or 4 at the moment in different parts of the country. Let's say that goes from 800 meters to 1,500 meters around. It cannot be spread by plane. And the fact is that no, it does not observe. I mean, most of the people, the applicators and the people don't want to leave this because this belt, it's a huge piece of land. They cannot do anything except to put cattle or put something else that don't use agrochemicals. And the government is ignoring all the sentence, and they don't do anything, they force the applicators. One thing that they could change a bit is in June is going to be a public hearing in the justice in Córdoba, because 3 persons were put in trial on two agriculture producers and 1 applicator went to trial. Were accused to produce some damage. I don't remember. There was one dead, a child, in this place called Ituzaingó. And this is going to be the first public trial in Argentina where 3 persons are accused to provoke a damage in heart. Depend how it's going to be the sentence. Monsanto, Syngenta, everyone is moving up behind, putting the best lawyers in order to defend these 3 guys, but there is a judge and that took the file, the denounce that came from 2008 actually, that was done in 2008. But there is not much observing of this limitation, and this and all the thing is out of control the way that they do the mixing of the cocktails. And also, there is a lot of suspicion that they use amount of glyphosate or whatever without any kind of control. When you use these things, you have to have a recipe. They had to be signed by the one engineer, agronomic engineer. But this doesn't work. Then it's out of control, the application. That's for sure. And you would say, well, they could reduce. Many times say, well, why the people don't reduce the concentration and then use whatever they need. No, because they need to increase the concentration in order to keep the rent. They need to increase the toxicity of the cocktails in order to keep the yield of the land, I mean, of this crop. And this is not something perverse or something, no, they know that they have to increase from 4 liters per hectare to 6 liters, of 8 liters per hectare. In order, what they, the experience said that they need to put an agrochemical in order to keep the yield of what means money. And the government is making silent because they are making something like $40,000 million a year as a piece of the cake of the earnings that goes to the national treasury as a part of these earnings. And that make a, well, Mr. Lema is part of that. They don't want to say, well, we are part of the business, we are not part of the solution. We are taking our piece of cake. And $4,000 million is a lot of money in Argentina and support a lot of things. That if you take out this $4,000 million, they want to increase engineers to $100,000 million. I mean, duplicate that amount of money that goes to the treasury as a retention, as a, I mean, tax, where you can put the tax. That is going to be a big problem for the economy of the country. Then it's a kind of things that are change each other.
Okay, thank you. I think maybe Henry can answer the other question.
Do you have a specific question? I think it's another question.
What is in here? I mean, what we hear now from him, what he's saying is, and he puts it really nicely, I mean, just to make it clear, these chemicals are sprayed by plane on people, knowingly. Okay? This situation is unthinkable in Europe, not because we are better people here, but because we have laws, and these people would be put in jail immediately. They would only fly with their plane once over a rural community in Switzerland and would spray intentionally a toxic chemical on the people on the ground, and they'd be in jail. They wouldn't repeat it. Never ever. Okay, so it doesn't even cross their minds to fly planes over our communities and spray people intentionally and knowingly, repeatedly, year after year, until the people show all kinds of diseases. And then, you know, I mean, this is just completely out of the radar that this could happen in Europe. So we have the laws, and I wonder, do you have the laws? Apparently not, or people don't. But these are legal questions then, but which brings me back to, if you say Monsanto and the chemical companies even now have the guts to rally behind the guys who are for once now being put on trial for something that in their home countries, also in the US, you would be sued if you would fly with a plane over communities. And, you know, at least after a while, people would start to have people like Mr. Dahl launch class action lawsuits against you. Now they rally behind the people who clearly are put on trial for good reason. I would like to know which companies, if you can show which companies are involved, and I'm sure if a company like Syngenta, for example, would be behind it and would provenly fund the lawyers to defend the bad guys,
I don't have a...
There would be NGOs in our areas, all lawyers in our areas that would start questioning Syngenta. They've been questioned on similar issues in Nestle and other companies. So there is, you know, there is ways you can legally try to get at these people, either in the places where they commit the crime or in the places where the companies are that are obviously violating laws of the countries where they are. So this is what I'm trying to get at here.
Is it a
Sorry.
Sorry.
In Italy, they are spraying from planes insecticides, so it's not forbidden in Europe. Sorry.
Okay, but
I have a question which can be connected with what you're trying to say here. And my question is to Henry.
Yeah, Do you mind to come here, actually, because they're telling me that they cannot hear from there.
I cannot hear. I can just.
Yeah, no, even the camera, because we are recording everything. Sorry, thanks.
No, it's just to ask. The new UN framework for business and human rights. Do you know anything about it? And could you connect it with what she's asking? Because, for example, now in Denmark, the Danish government has adopted a new CSR, Corporate Social Responsibility Action Plan. No, it's just to ask Henry if. Oh gosh. Yeah. I was just wondering, because there's a big discussion now within corporate social responsibility about the UN Global Compact. You know, most people are very critical about the UN Global Compact, which is fine. But then on the other hand, we have the framework, the new framework on business and human rights. Mm-hmm. And the Danish government has adopted the Global Compact, but they have also adopted the framework. And they're actually going to set a new institution whereby if you have a Danish company, let's say in Kenya or in Argentina, that is actually, you know, messing around, you can actually sue it in Denmark. So maybe that's like an international instrument that could, you know, I don't know if you know anything about it.
Yes, it's what you're talking about is a very familiar issue, and if you have a very strong human rights case, up to now you could have brought it in the United States. Now that has been called into question, where the Supreme Court is going to decide a case in 2 or 3 months. That will make it will make a great difference whether you can bring human rights violations abroad in a lawsuit in the United States. As it happens, I have drafted a particular law for Costa Rica, making it so that now it's pending, right? It's pending in Congress. It's not a law yet. It hasn't been enacted. It's what we call a bill. Un proyecto de ley. And that particular bill says that if there is if a human rights offense has been committed anywhere in the world, and the country where it has been committed is not a suitable forum, then a lawsuit can be filed in Costa Rica. And that I did that as a backup in case that the United States Supreme Court decides that we can't bring that type of case in the U.S. Now, again, it's only a bill. It's pending in Congress. I don't know what's going to happen, but that would give you the possibility of bringing that particular a human rights case. It has to be a strong human rights case in Costa Rica or in any other country that enacts that particular type of law. It would provide you with a forum.
In a country like Denmark, the discussion is that you have Danish corporations going to third world countries, and the Danish government has no power to control them because they're really, really powerful. And you know, they do not follow, let's say, the Kenyan laws or the Kenyan regulations. So what do you do as a government when you have a company that is Danish placed, but it's actually misbehaving in another country? So the idea is actually now you can sue them in Denmark. That's what I mean. You can see that you can sue the Danish companies in Denmark if they're misbehaving in Kenya or Argentina.
Well, yes, there is this concept of international jurisdiction. And in the United States, we have the Alien Torts Claim Act, which was enacted about 200 years ago, and it was enacted to fight piracy. Because we had the problem, 200 years ago, the problem was that there would be an American ship or an English ship in high seas, and pirates would jump on board and kill everybody. So the question was, well, how can we punish the pirates? And so we have this law in the U.S. saying that any crime against the law of nations that has been committed anywhere in the world, you can file a lawsuit in the United States. Now, as I said before, it has been called into question, and there is a line of thought, which I don't agree with, but I'm going to tell you what it is. This line of thought states that corporations are not subject to international law. I think it's an abomination, but that's what some people are saying, and that's what this particular case, it's called the Cayobel case, will decide in 2 or 3 months from now, because it's pending in the Supreme Court. So I hope that they'll... right now in the States, corporations are having lots of rights, like they can make political contributions, etc. But it seems that when it comes to awarding them rights, everything goes. Now, when they have to assume liability, then there are all these theories that would prevent that from happening. I hope it won't be the case. I hope that the Supreme Court is going to hold that corporations are indeed subject to international law and that they can be punished whenever they do something wrong. But we'll have to wait and see. And now, in other countries, you know, there are laws like the one I said about Costa Rica that are being studied, and because really you should always have a forum where you could bring a human rights case. You should have at least one country in the world, and the legal term for this is forum necessitatis, that you need a particular court, you need a forum for justice to be done.
So Henry, following up a little bit what Angelica said and this discussion, then for example for these Argentinians that has been, they are yearly after year sprayed with these herbicides, where would be the place for them to, you know, to go to against Monsanto, etc.?
Well, okay. You don't know this, but I was born in Argentina. I know Argentina very well. I lived for 27 years in Argentina. I got my first law degree in Argentina. And there is there are techniques. We tend to think about lawsuits, but really, the most powerful court in the world is a court of public opinion. And that's where you should wage the battle, in the court of public opinion, on the one hand. On the other hand, what I would suggest is befriend the legislators, and let the legislators know that if they do what they should do, they will get the votes. Because here, all these situations are situations where a great number of people have been victimized. Now, each person is one vote. Now, if the legislators make the connection between, oh, if I enact this law that is obviously very good for the people, and you tell the legislator, well, I'm going to make sure that the people know that you are the one who enacted this law, things start to change very quickly. And so if you have with the current law in Córdoba, you can't do anything. But it's not difficult to change it. And if you want, I can give you a law that they have in Panama that is very good, and it could be enacted in Córdoba with no problem at all. And it would strengthen your case tenfold, 100-fold. On the one hand, so you need the legislators to realize the political opportunity that you can present them with. And then, of course, for the press to know what's going on, they have to receive the necessary information, and suddenly you will see how everything changes. And the corporations that were defiant up to now, they will start trying to compromise. That's the way we work. That's how we have obtained results in other countries and other lawsuits, and I think that Córdoba would not be much different from that.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, Angelica, I want to pick up on something you said. You said that corporations are there to make money, and they do that in preference to the public good. Clearly, corporations must make some...
Vivian, I think we cannot hear you well with the microphone. Maybe...
Come up there.
No microphone? No, better without the microphone, apparently.
Use the microphone, but keep it a little...
Here, okay.
20, no,
there,
keep 20
there.
centimeters under... No.
Under the...
Yes.
20 centimeters.
Okay.
All right.
So you said that corporations must make money, and they do that at the expense of the public good in preference.
Mm-hmm.
No? It's probably because I'm under the speaker. Right. So I think this is something which is going to be part of our debate. Science, I don't think we should mix necessarily pure science with technology and commerce. Scientists are inquisitive people. They like asking interesting questions and testing them through using scientific methods. So the seeds of this GMO debate that we're discussing today started just after Watson and Crick cracked the genetic code. The research started right then. But it wasn't until some decades later that investors and companies started to get interested. They saw there was a potential to make money. Now once that happens, the rules of the game change, because up till then you might have said to someone, well, if you're doing that and if it was ingested, might it cause an immune reaction? And the person would have said, well, yes, I mean, it could do this by this mechanism or that, and we'd have had a sort of reasonable conversation. As soon as it's being commercialized, they have to tell you, because they want you to eat it, that it's safe. And that's a different set of rules. So the question is, when should society and stakeholders be interested in becoming involved in the process of regulation? Is it at a very early stage? Because, I mean, if we think now, what's going on now, which in 10, 20 years' time, we're going to be sitting around a table thinking, how the hell are we going to control this? So synthetic biology is one. Mm-hmm. You know, already people started, I mean, it's still at the development stage, the scientific stage, but it will soon be, people will be thinking of commercializing it. So where, I mean, David maybe has some thoughts about this, where in this process, we don't want to stifle scientific, or should scientists go to society and say, I'm thinking of working on this, it's got these potential problems, should I do it? Or do we let scientists get on with what they're good at, asking scientific questions? I mean, I know a guy in Leiden, he spent his whole life investigating the masticatory muscles of the mallard duck. Very interesting work. No particular commercial, so do we stop people at that stage, or do we try and catch it when it's getting to the investment stage? I don't know, but these, I think, are all relevant questions for the debate.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, Simon wanted to answer that, and then maybe David has a few comments. Thanks, Vivi.
I think the first thing I would say, Irina didn't say that it was just about money at the expense of other things. But, I mean, I won't say, I worked for HSBC for 21 years, and actually very proud of that. But, I mean, HSBC did not for a second, I'm sure, just try to do things to make money. It's about you actually to have any sustainable existence as a company. Of course, there are cowboys out there that just want to make money, but I think the big companies, certainly my personal experience, is that they recognise they need to live in society if they're going to keep making money for the long term. I think it is hard to, in terms of when to get things put in place. Ultimately, what we need is the right legislation. You don't get the right legislation unless you've got the right science, and I think we need to encourage scientists to look at whatever they feel like looking at, because some of these things may not seem important now, but may turn out to be very important later. But we do need to reach the legislators, as Henry talked, get these things put in laws. But we then need to enforce those laws, and we need to get through to the public, communicate to the public. My experience of reaching the public is that even with something which is the biggest public health risk after smoking, which is long-term exposure to air pollution, it is genuinely very difficult to get through to people, because people say it's invisible, the risks are, statistical, and so on. But actually, if you look at things very, very rigorously, critically, as we were encouraged to do, and I'm a great believer that we need good content, reliable, rigorous content, and then very good communication. If you do that and talk about the real, statistics, and then get through to the right people, eventually the message will get through. Because one of the things I was taught many years ago is that the story gets confused by the facts. And if the facts actually are, people can try and concoct any story they want, but sooner or later the facts do tend to come through. But we do need to sort of get the messages out to the public. The poor public is, all of us are overwhelmed by things we have to think about and constantly bombarded. But it is a big challenge. In April last year, just to give you one example, it's not just about persuading the public, it's not even just about enforcing the laws. Laws for nitrogen dioxide, one of the two key gases or pollutants we worry about, are breached by a factor of 2 or 3 near the busiest streets in London. Well, I mean, that's a bit like spraying, pesticides across whole cities or something. I mean, Client Earth, who are going to talk tomorrow, I'm a science and policy advisor there. They've tried to enforce these laws, and the government says, even the High Court ruling in the UK was, well, it's not for us to, judge that the UK is breaching the law, and any enforcement should be done by Brussels. I mean, that's just unbelievable. So Client Earth, fortunately, is taking that to the Court of Appeal in about 2 weeks' time. But it is also a government attitude. Last year, the government issued a smog alert in the UK, and it was the front page of every newspaper. I did about 10 TV interviews within 24 hours. This year, we hit levels of pollution which were 10 out of 10 on the Daily Health Index, which is the worst air quality that they categorise, and the government said absolutely nothing. And that's because they didn't want people having air pollution in front of them on the front page of the newspaper. I suspect it's the same about other problems that we'll talk about over the next 2 days. The governments actually don't like having it pushed into their face, the fact that there are these huge problems, and the governments aren't doing enough about it, even to enforce or comply with existing laws. So I think there's a big challenge.
But these are all after the event effects that you're talking about. And one of the things about risk assessment is we want to get into an anticipatory mode to avoid getting into that situation. So it's where society starts to interject in development of potentially pervasive technologies.
But all I'd say though is that whether we're talking about pesticides or chemicals or anything else, these laws, it was the anticipatory bit. It was the World Health Organization guidelines which were then put in laws which are now not being complied with. So all I would say to you is that that is the sort of due process. WHO type standards or other international standards, legislation, enforcement, public awareness, or I call it public understanding, because it's not just about awareness, it's actually when people get it. So I think those were anticipatory things. The World Health Organization coming up with the best advice they could. But I suppose they were based on these huge cohort studies, so they were in a sense identifying risks. Yeah.
Yeah, I think here there is before I leave David Quist's answer as well, I think we need to be aware of something that we've been discussing with a few colleagues as well. I think it's quite ambitious, the program that we are covering, but also there is a reason why, because we wanted to bring experts from nanotechnologies and electromagnetic fields and pesticides and chemicals together, because vertically they seem very different, and they are scientifically. But horizontally, they're very common. There are a few points that are completely common. You know, scientists have been harassed whether they are specialized in electromagnetic fields or nanoparticles or GMOs. Victim compensation is the same. Law enforcement is the same. But it's true that for each vertical topic, let's say, yeah, for pesticides, chemicals, and GMOs, and etc., we have a different level of problem. So therefore, we have to arrive to understand where are we in each different area, what is the best strategy to move forward. Because, for example, speaking to Alex also through email, Alex Winkles, I don't know where he is, we were talking about, you know, how little, in terms of law, you know, how little law protect us. For example, we launched a campaign to remove Wi-Fi from schools in Spain, and we wanted to do a little bit what Simon said. You know, we wanted to arrive to society so parents would say, okay, oh, this is dangerous. This potentially is a carcinogenic effect. It's been classified by the WHO as a potential carcinogenic type 2B, I think, and therefore there is a potential risk of cancer. Therefore, parents are going to act. Okay, that is a strategy, or what do we want to do with that? But what we want to do with the electromagnetic pollution is different of what we need to do with the nanoparticles and what we need to do with pesticides and GMOs. But the interesting thing about this, and that's why it is interesting that we all, even if we are not specialized in one vertical area or even in one horizontal area, is that we learn from other areas. So what has been done in chemicals, you know, how we have jumped all these obstacles to arrive to REACH, because REACH is better than what it was before. There was nothing, but it still is not good enough. So, but in nanoparticles, we don't have even a piece of law that is kind of covering what nanotechnologies, potential risk of nanotechnologies, and or EMF. Electromagnetic fields. So we need to really listen and state the current state of all problems in all vertical areas, and then learn from what it has been done in other areas to improve and be a little bit ahead. I mean, in some respects, in some aspects, we have to be talking about risk assessment, and for example, with asbestos. In Spain, there is a law now, but even, 20 years ago, there was no law. But now we have to talk about asbestos and law reinforcement for asbestos, because even if there is a law or clean air pollution, I mean, for pollution, governments are not doing their job. So that's also another aspect we have to consider in this Congress. So from areas where there is no law, in one stream, to areas where there is a law, but it is not being used. Even to areas where there is law, it's been applied, but the compensation of victims is not good enough. So we have to kind of cover all these, areas, because we are mixing all these things together, because that's what's happening in the world. Not because we wanted to do, we are not talking a lot about climate change, but probably this is the only topic we are not talking about in this Congress because it was just too much. But we are trying to cover as much as possible. But it's interesting that we, that we think about this horizontally.
Can I just make one point? I think the only way to address the potential risks is to put the precautionary principle into law. So that it actually is it binds on companies and governments and things. The precautionary principle actually, I've looked at it quite a few times. I'm not an expert on it, But what struck me when I've looked at it is it's quite narrowly drawn. You know, it talks about sort of narrow environmental risks and so on. Yeah, it ought to be a much more general risk. Frankly, it ought to apply to things like financial markets. Yeah, and we wouldn't then be in the mess that we're in. But the capitalist model is very much built on people making their money out of free options, basically. Where they go and do something, you know, unless there's a proven reason not to do it, sort of thing. So I think the only way to address these unknown or potential risks really is to put the precautionary principle into law generally.
Yeah. Sorry, Harwood. I don't know if David wanted to say something, and then we go on. Then the next. Lady.
Sure. Yeah, just getting back to this point about social engagement and so forth. And I mean, there's been a lot of work that's ongoing about public participation and how to do social engagement. If it was easy, it would have been done right now. It's a very difficult thing to do, how to go about it. But your point is well taken. I mean, there is, and Brian Wynn is an esteemed social scientist that has developed this idea of upstream engagement on technologies and development. So that is to say, and you know, we actually even say this when we sit down with people from industry, and it's to say, look, the degree that you engage biosafety experts, interested stakeholders in society in the development of technologies is really actually going to help you in the long run. You're going to develop socially responsive technologies that society is interested in. You're going to develop safer technologies. And in the long run, I mean, they want an economically sustainable product. So the degree that they do this kind of engagement will actually help their bottom line if that's what they're really interested in. It's hard to get short-sighted business strategies to be thinking about this. But I think there is certainly some traction that could be get from that or from regulators to bring a conversation a lot earlier in the process and have more upstream engagement there. The second point about how much should society kind of regulate what scientists do, and I think that's very difficult from the standpoint of one, I mean, scientists have a hard time being able to determine what of their scientific research is going to be successful or maybe have some kind of product and so forth. So I don't think that I would like to see some kind of socially mandated control on that. I mean, scientists have a hard time enough there. But you could think about how the social conversation might be structured in a way that looks at certain principles about irreversibility, permanence. In nanotechnology, they're thinking about this, about, okay, what are some just basic metrics we don't want a nanotechnology product to have? Things like bioaccumulation and persistence. These are things that society generally doesn't want to see. Choice is another thing. I mean, a lot of people don't have a problem with technologies or think of medical where someone whose life might be at risk, they may take more of a risk if they can make that personal choice. But things that we're putting in the environment and the food supply where there is not this kind of choice is something that society usually gives pause on. So the acceptability of risks and where to put that acceptability, who determines that acceptability, should be part of that equation. I want to jump back, if I may, to an issue about particularly around soy and glyphosate usage. In public awareness, which I think is an emerging issue in terms of trade, particularly in terms of trade with Europe, who imports, I don't know what percentage of the soy from Argentina, for example, maybe 40%, I don't know. How much soy, how much of the European soy comes from Argentina? Do you know?
I don't know, but between Argentina and China, 95%.
Yeah, okay, so it's a large amount. The thing that's emerging here, we're dealing with this right now in Europe because we have more restrictive laws on certain chemicals. So, for example, we, as Norway as an EEA country, we also evaluate the applications that are going into the EFSA system. So that's the environmental assessment of the GMO. So Norway is invited to give comments on these applications and whether they would be allowed in Norway. So, for example, we have sitting on my desk in the regulatory pipeline now, things like 2,4-D. Which is a chemical that they're also developing, just like the glyphosate tolerant. They're now developing the next generation. You know, now that we have resistance to this chemical, we develop another chemical that the GMO is tolerant. So 2,4-D, dicamba. There's a few others in the pipeline. So we have this problem with in Norway that 2,4-D is a banned substance. Oh, sorry. Thanks. Is banned. Also, glufosinate is also banned. So we have this ethical double standard that we're somewhat faced with about whether we would accept another country to produce to specifically use, I mean, again, attended use of these products, to use 2,4-D in a production system in which we would import this product that we ourselves have said is not acceptable for our society. So we're faced with this double standard, and Europe is also faced with this double standard and will be. I mean, right now, Europe is producing chemicals and exporting it to particularly developing countries that they themselves have banned, and they're importing those products. Because you don't have direct, you can't say, okay, this import used this banned product. There's no way that you could track that. And with GMOs, it's a different story. Because you could test, you could test the residues, I suppose. But increasingly, as things like 2,4-D, probably depending on how glufosinate goes, if that's going to be banned, I don't know where it is in REACH and so forth. But
70.
Okay.
17 or 16.
So it's down already. This kind of problem is going to become more in the forefront. And I think that my point in bringing this up is I think there's no public awareness about this situation, about this kind of double standard that's being engaged in here to be accepting of exporting certain chemicals or allowing production of chemicals that, that society has deemed as being unacceptable, but willing to allow others to produce using that way and then accepting their products.
No, completely. Thank you. Harmut.
Thank you. Because there's no line in this discussion. It's really a problem.
Let's see. Right. So I think that I like your explanation of the state of these horizontal issues in the different vertical fields, because I think that is something which really plagues us, so that, for example, you work in GMOs, and then you hear that there are so and so many dead people from smoking, and so why should then we discuss about GMOs, because we have all these dead people with the tobacco industry, so we should better go all to work in the tobacco research and try to get these laws better. And I think what should be done, or what could be one outcome, is that in principle we would like to see a certain standards and equal standards throughout the technology, but due to whatever reasons, a lot of economic and social reasons, we currently don't apply these standards equally. And I think this is reality, but I think we really need to point to this and say, well, that is not a reason to maybe to proceed in one field, or to even set up higher standards in the other fields. So because in the end you cannot deal with these horizontal issues in all fields on an equal pace, on an equal standard. So I think that needs to be clear to a lot of people, because many people working, for example, in biosafety, are not aware that certain standards in their field are not applied in other fields, or that other fields have much higher standards of scrutiny. So I think that is also a matter of creating awareness and knowledge amongst scientists. What is the standard in your field, and what is maybe standards in other fields, and what should be the standard in the end. Well, so I think that is also a matter which we should advocate.
Well, I think what I would say to that is that I can sort of, I've already got a sort of a matrix or a table coming to mind. In a sense, the sort of vertical slices are, chemicals, pesticides, air pollution, nanotechnology, electromagnetic radiation, and the rows sort of start with sort of science, and then they go down to policy, and then into law, and then to public understanding and enforcement and things. Because actually what I wouldn't suggest for a second that scientists left looking at, emerging sciences and looked at smoking impacts, because I think we actually know about those things on that particular, example on a table. What we actually need is to be identifying the new risks, and as quickly as possible, if we can't get the precautionary principle in place in law, identifying the new risks and getting those as quickly as possible put in legislation, not just ideally for one vertical slice, but across all the slices. And I think then we win in every area if we win in one area.
Yeah, and I also wanted to say that this is also a place for scientists to understand exactly what you were saying. What's happening in other areas is going to help them themselves in their field of expertise to see what are they, what they can do, because obviously what they do it for society, especially independent scientists. They do it to make a better society. They do it to improve our living conditions or I think I'm going to go soon. But anyway, but yeah, I mean, it's a good point, and what Simon was saying, I agree as well. Harmut, if you want to come and sit here for a minute, maybe I need to go. Excuse me, because I have a very small baby. But I'm with you, maybe in the back. Sorry.
Can I make? Yes. Closer. Okay. By how? Maybe here. Now it's better. I want to. Yes, like here. Yes, by now.
Can you turn down the sensitivity? Can you turn down the sensitivity?
I can speak. Okay. Yes, it's enough. I go down. Sorry. No, now it's better, no? Now it's better. Sorry for the back person. But, sorry. My name is Belén Ramos. I work since 1996 in a Spanish organic consumers organization. I'm the environmental PO, and I want to introduce two completely different comments. The first comment is about the lady's comment about the Argentina situation in Spain, that apparently for her is quite impossible in Europe to find problems with pesticides use, with not allowed pesticides, and I can demonstrate it that we are using some pesticides that they are not allowed in our market far away, for instance DDT. I can show you that in 2010 in domestic ducks we found DDT, not only in the Spanish domestic ducks, and as here we have some experts in POPs and can explain us that if we found DDT, it's because it's in the environment is closely to be used, because otherwise we could find only DDE. So it's a metabolism, so it's not stable. And we found not only DDT, we found also hexachlorobenzene. And the only possibility is something that has been put it on the table, that we are making some importation of products that can be treated with these biocides, and we can be breathing and eating this kind of insecticide. So maybe we have no this direct exposition, but coming closer, just in February we have an European decision for putting out from the market some biocides, and it's only allowed to put it on the market. I don't remember the name. It's fenfutron, fenfenimfutron. It's a kind of concrete fungicide that is not allowed to be put it on the market for August. And now in May, we have a regional government in Spain, in Galicia concretely, that they have approved to use in a massive fumigation for eucalyptus forest in the La Coruña countryside. So they are approving now that it's legal, of course, till August, but we are using in the second part of 2012. So it's when we have recognized that we have security problems, we are using in a massive situation. So we are in the borderline, so we are not far away from the Argentinian cases, only like an example. And the other comment that I think is more constructive for this forum is because I have, normally I'm technician and I'm used to come to this kind of meetings because I thanks to your job, I can make my job. So normally I translate the technician studies into consumers' output. So citizens ask me about electromagnetic fields, about nanoparticles, about chemicals, and I can say to you that they are very concerned. For them, there are some problems, but I think the problem is that they don't understand what is happening at the scientific level. So if maybe I can help you, I can give you a kind of guidelines on something that after 16 years working, translating from the technical level to consumers, I have is my personal guidelines. And I think one of the main sentence that you have to consider is that from the scientific level cannot be a contradictional message. So you have to have an agreement of what you are saying to the public. You cannot arrive with some concrete study and just 6 months later with the contrary statement, because the public health, they don't rely in future results. They need an accurate advices, and if it's possible, in a positive way. So maybe you can say, these are disadvantages, these are advantages, but finally we need a positive message. So what can I do? So if we want to change the world, we have to say in which direction they have to believe, or they have to create the world, but they have to have the reasons. So give me the information for making informed choice. So let me to evaluate if I can take the risk or not. So I'm an adult, I'm not a child. So give me all. If you say me only that something is perfect, I don't believe it, because nothing is perfect and nothing can be so bad. So let me know all your information and let me to make the choice. For me, it's the first message. The second message is, please, you have to consider that what is the information point now. And all the international surveys, they say that, I think, unfortunately, all the citizens, they look for information in the mass media. If you go to Eurobarometers, it's unfortunately, but they go to the mass media. More than 80% of people, they say that they get information, environmental information about mass media. So we have to inform the professional, the editors, all the journalists. So it's a pity that today they are not here, because they are translating your information to the public. So they have to be in the scenario of the scientific level to translate it, like me, that I'm here. I'm not scientific at all, but I need your input for creating output, because otherwise I can get only a partial way. And the other term is that you have to be honest, to recognize the limitation of your publication. I have done this study only in female, only in 5 years. For instance, the electromagnetic fields is a pity, because they are appearing in publications that I have to look into the concretely information to know what is the environment of this for arriving to this conclusion. But the citizens, they have no this opportunity to translate it. So put it in context, be honest, because to say, okay, we didn't take in consideration this parameter that is important or not, and also to keep in touch, give information points, one voice for one parameter, because otherwise you have all the industry lobby that they can do it perfectly alone. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I would like to take just a... Yeah. I also have to learn. Yeah. Just would like to take some few more questions, because I think it should be time now to see what preliminary results we can draw out of this discussion, and to see what we can do and how we should use this stimulus for the next days. So I see 2 more, 3. And I think that's it. So I will take the three of you. I start on the right side. I'm not aware of your sequence now.
My name is Eva Marschalek. I come from an NGO from Austria dealing with electromagnetic fields. And I would like to ask if not only the precautionary principle should be turned into law, but also the inversion of proof. No, because for electromagnetic fields, for example, the person, the victims, have to prove that the electromagnetic fields damage them. But in reality, for a lot of other things, the producer has to prove that his product is okay and does not harm the people. And I guess for nanotechnologies, it would also be useful to have the inversion of proof. Concerning the public, I think the public, just the interested public is asking you, but how many % of the whole public is interested? I think this is a minor percentage. And so the question is, how can we reach the other part of the public, the main part? And in this point, I think we have to make a difference between the exposure, for example, from electromagnetic fields, from base stations, where you have no choice and which is without a contribution, information of the public, then they will ask. But if the public has a personal benefit, like from mobile phone, they are not interested to know anything because they have this personal convenience and they don't want to know that perhaps they should not use it à gogo and so on, and with earpieces better than others. Because in Austria, the medical chamber has made a poster for precautionary use of the mobile phones. But in reality, the public is not really interested and does not follow this. And the main point for me, which is a very crucial point, is that those scientists who pretend that, and I think they are true, but if they say that electromagnetic fields are harmful when they exceed a certain limit, they should respect themselves in public, their recommendations. And if there is no coherence in behavior from those scientists, I think the case is lost. No? So I think there are a lot of things to improve.
Comment? Two things. I suppose the first is that if we had the precautionary principle in law, which said that you couldn't do things unless they proved not to have any harmful effects, or you knew what they were, we wouldn't need to worry about the inversion of proof.
That's not the precautionary principle, sir.
Isn't it? Well, please say what it is, please, yeah. So.
But in case of scientific doubt, you are allowed as a public authority to take measures. You are not obliged, you are allowed. And if I could just add to that, this principle is already applicable to financial situations at present. It's not implied, but it's applicable in law.
Well, I'd be very interested to hear about both of those in more detail. My understanding was that, anyway, my understanding of the precautionary principle is slightly different, but I'm not doubting what you say, but my understanding is slightly different. But if a proper let's put it this way, if a true precautionary principle was in place which said that you didn't do things unless they weren't going to have harmful effects, we perhaps wouldn't need to worry about the inversion of proof point. But that's in a very ideal world. In terms of communicating with the public, I think the mass media, that is how people absorb things, because most people haven't got time to look at things in great detail themselves, and it is very important that there are robust, but also honest and responsible. I would say responsible is the most important word. Responsible statements, which don't overstate or don't understate the risks, in the sort of communication universe that we're sort of talking about, because you really are, or one is really making one's own task completely impossible. If you set standards for discussion about nanoparticles, let's say, which are sort of lay out all the scientific concerns, but that's not being done for any of the others. I'm not saying for a second the concerns shouldn't be laid out, but they should be laid out responsibly and with the right audiences. If you can distill a message down to one sentence for the media, and it can just include one appropriate word to make it clear that these things aren't 100% more certain, just say it's like these other risks or something.
Christian.
Yes, my name is Christian Bello. I am a member of ANSER. And yes, no. No, it's very uncomfortable. I'm sorry. I prefer to talk like that. I totally agree with what the pink lady. I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. Okay, but I would like to make a couple of remarks about the common topics, the common features between the different topics. I think to move the lines, we need to get the public opinion with us. And for this, we need to build some bridges between the institutional research and civil society. And one of the bridges is, of course, vulgarization conference. We need to talk simply. Everything complex can be explained simply. And one way is, for example, to open much more widely this type of conference to the civil society. I am surprised we are so few people here. We need the civil society to participate in this type of conference. This is the first bridge. The second bridge we need to build between the civil society and the institutional research is participative research. Research is mainly founded in partnership between institutional research and private firms. We need to make pressure, our scientific community needs to make pressure on the governments to make money, to make public money in fundamental research in partnership with the civil society. How can we conceive to develop a project on the agronomic field without interacting closely with those who have invented agriculture, who are not researchers, who are not agronomists, but farmers? We need to promote this participative research, which was born in Quebec, in Canada, but which now is applied in France, in other countries, but very locally. We need to make a counterpower of public research policies by promoting this type of participative research. And the other thing, the second remark, is about we need to change that too. It's a long-term work, but we need to do that from the inside, from our scientific community, is to change the phantasmatic vision of the progress. Because this phantasmatic vision of the progress makes confusion between progress and modernity. The neutron bomb is perhaps modern. For me, it will never be the progress. And it's because of this vision, of this phantasmatic vision of the progress, that agriculture, for example, farmers want to get the GMO technology because they are afraid to miss one important step of the progress by refusing the GMO technology. We are in this phantasmatic vision of the progress. And we need for that, for example, inside our community, to promote perhaps philosophy and social science in biology, in physics, chemistry courses. We need to fight against our own university, each one of our own countries. I think it's a long-term work, but we need to do this work because we are in this phantasmatic vision of the progress. We say everything which comes out of a laboratory is good for the humanity because it's a result of a research activity. We need to change this vision.
Thank you. So I take you. Yeah, you're the last one for this round.
Just two very brief points. Philip Michael from the Irish Doctors Environmental Association.
It's been suggested that we need to clarify the science, one of the prime things. My point is that the corporations are spending millions of dollars to try and confuse the science. If they see that we're going to try and block them from developing a particular thing, they will pay millions to try and confuse the public. This has happened again and again, as we know, particularly with something like the tobacco legislation, where it took 50 years for it to be accepted that there was a problem. So that's a huge thing that we have to overcome. And the other thing is, when we try to reduce legislation to prevent these things coming on stream, they again spend millions of dollars to prevent the legislation. This is happening in the EU. Anyone who has any familiarity with Brussels, there are paid people, lobbyists, who are they're earning millions of dollars to try and prevent legislation. And how do we combat that? And finally, there are moves, and I'd like Henry maybe to comment on an international court for the environment. This has been mooted recently, and also an ombudsperson for the environment. These are two things that I think are very necessary if we want to make any progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, you want to question?
Well, yes, I fully agree with what you say. I would say once more, the court of public opinion counts very much. And if we want public opinion on our side, again, as you said, things have to be clear. It has to be in black and white, and we must fight those people who are paid to confuse things. And of course, they're there and they get the money and they try to confuse as much as they can. And I take it that our role is to simplify and to clarify, and basically to make the truth emerge. And one good thing about this type of conference is that it brings together people with different backgrounds, but basically we all want the same. And we all have different skills, and this is a fantastic opportunity to put all our skills together. And by the third day, I'm sure we're going to have very good ideas, and then the thing would be how to implement them.
I think what I would suggest as well as an output, and perhaps my friend in the striped shirt and tie and I should make a start on it, but I think what we should actually set ourselves as an aim perhaps is drafting ourselves what that precautionary principle would be, that what would we like to see as that precautionary principle. And it may only be a sentence, maybe a paragraph, but perhaps we make a start. I've certainly I've got lots of friends who are scientists. I'm actually a civil engineer originally, but I've got lots of scientists who are friends, and more than one of them has told me that there's a lot of money to be made in manufacturing uncertainty. I think if we had the right sort of precautionary principle designed, and then it was in legislation, there'd be a lot of money for us to make in manufacturing uncertainty, which would stop things which we thought might be pretty daft actually happening. So we'd have the boot would be on the other foot for a change. So I think that's a practical challenge for us, and I think it would have huge benefits really right round the world if we could perhaps, with the authority of something like a Congress like this, come up with precautionary principle in public health terms or something like that.
May I just briefly just give a bit different perspective, and I thank you for your intervention. And you pointed out, I think it was David Michaels who wrote this book called Manufacturing Doubt, and it goes into tobacco history and so forth. But what I wanted to get back on is this idea about the clarity of the science, and of course this manufacturing of doubt is a problem. I think if we go back a little further and see the root of the problem, it's more the reliance on science and scientists to come up with an answer, as if scientists could provide an answer with a certain amount of certainty and clarity that would allow, and basically the regulators and policymakers are very happy in allowing the scientists to say, this is the answer, and then they would just put that forth into policy, and that takes any liability away from them. The problem is that scientists don't have all the answers, number one, and number two, that a lot of these, so what has happened is traditionally these problems have been reduced to merely technical issues. When, as we've been discussing all today, there are different dimensions of the issue related to society, related to health, related to all these other things that should be part of a broader societal discussion. It's not just a scientific issue, but it's one of the issues on the table. So in a lot of technology fields, it's been up to the scientists to say, is this good or is this bad? When in reality, it's society that should be making those determinations. So just having a clarity on the science isn't really going to help if you haven't already, it's one part of it, the science, but also the societal issues.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think this is, you want to have some more input now? Okay, I think it's also looking on my watch. It is time to see what we can gain out of our discussion and try to see, to make a picture. So when I look into my notes and remember what I have heard, I think that we could apply this small sequence of events that Simon has brought up, that of course in the fields, in our vertical fields we have chosen, and this is more or less due to our preferences and our own knowledge. There are of course many more vertical fields in this world which need to be debated, as atomic power. We heard this in the morning from the professor from the university. So, but I think that the issue of good science, of the public awareness and public understanding, effective policies, and an effective implementation of this, or effective, what do you call this, enforcement, yes. Yeah. I think these could be fields of applicable, fields for all of these vertical issues we are going to debate. And I think that also with the concept we will have tomorrow, that before we hear scientific input on these certain issues, we will be informed about the legal framework in the EU, the applicable framework, so that we can actually, in the end, maybe find us in a situation where we can see what is actually the governing law, the governing rules and standards in this certain field, and so we can maybe get an overview about the situation in which we are. We have, when I just put on this list, we have mentioned a lot of principles, or I would just call them principles, that should be applicable horizontally. So I think that the precautionary principle, of course, I guess, is a fundamental principle. There are, of course, we have this, we have legal provisions on that, and we have a lot of concepts which are not written in law, but I think your definition was more or less the concept. And of course we have, like you quoted or almost quoted, we have legal provisions on how this was then put into law. So I think that is also something we can state, that we want to see the precautionary principle implemented in all regulation that govern the different fields, and maybe that is the fact, and maybe that is not the fact. I don't have the overview on that. The burden of proof, the inversion of proof, I think is a fundamental principle that should be applicable in all this field. Then we talked about the choice issue, and I think this is certainly driving the public opinion. Burden of proof, I guess, is something, if you are really hurt, then this is an issue for you. But the level of choice, so is there, can you just by simple measures avoid certain products or certain technologies that you do not like? Yeah, the public doesn't need to justify the choice. So if I don't like the product A, is there an opportunity for me to buy a comparable product B? So I think that is something which drives people. If something will be present in any food which we are buying, this is something people don't like. I think you had a right observation in this. If you take a high risk because you are on the brink of death, then of course this is a personal decision. You might take a high risk and do something which other people would never do in their normal life. But you are in a very different situation, of course. And I think, so the level of choice and freedom to choose, I think, is something which is definitely important when we will communicate with consumers or create messages for the consumers. I think, I don't know how to really include this in our work, but I think the issue of personal convenience with certain products is certainly a big driving issue for people to do something which they, if they really think about, they should not do. So then, but of course this is a complicated issue. I think that there are a lot of laws or something that, because of certain health reasons, are going to forbid something which otherwise people would do. So I think that it's not, we are not helpless with this issue, because you can just restrict certain types of uses which are convenient, but when lawmakers and society are convinced that these convenient uses are really dangerous to yourself, you just can restrict it. I think this is an option, of course. And participation of civil society in research, that is something which, when we act as scientists, this is something which should be really integrated. And okay, we know the situation in France, which is your country. I know the situation in Germany, and this is something which is very different across the countries in Europe. So, like France obviously has a pretty strong system, yeah, compared to Germany anyway, in public participation in science. Yeah, we heard about all this example. This does not exist in Germany, and we don't have this. So there are differences in Europe, and we might look to France and say, well, that's pretty nice, and that should be a situation where we should, which we should reach in future. So these were more or less issues and principles which could be valid for all our vertical issues. And we have, I think we really need to consider also in our debates the analysis of actually what is regulated, what is legal, what is not done, and what is done. So I think we should really avoid to mixing all these things. That, for example, the pesticide spraying by planes on cities and whatever is certainly forbidden in Switzerland and Germany, I guess also, of course. And the use of outdated chemicals is, I guess, also forbidden, but it happens. But that does not mean that we cannot do anything against it. So I think we need to have a really good analysis of things that are happening and where actually we would like to see laws and regulation in place, or where things are more or less a matter of implementation of this. So that, I think, are the issues which should be going into our discussion and which should guide us tomorrow.